Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, I would like to talk about the spotlight, which is a kind of light that we will use a lot in our architecture and interior projects. They are lights that allow us to choose a specific direction and they have a very particular light distribution. So normally we use this kind of light when we want to simulate, for example, built-in lights or halogen lamps or even track lighting fixtures. So there are many situations where we can use this spotlight and it can help us to produce a very photorealistic render because we can simulate in a very interesting way the behavior of the light source. Okay, so I'm working here with the same file that we used in the previous video, and we have already two sphere lights placed in the scene, and now I would like to place some spotlights. And it's important to understand that it's not so easy to place the spotlights. We have to be careful because we need to choose specific points that will define the location and also the direction. So I won't be using now the visual settings. I will close here this window. And of course, you have to open the Enscape objects window once again. And I would like to make a quick demonstration of how it works. So I'll click here in the spotlight button, and if I try to place this light somewhere here in our scene, we can see that the spotlight works in a very specific way, and we need to click 4 times. So I'll click here anywhere in the ceiling, and the first click is basically a reference point. So I click here anywhere. And the second point will be actually the point where this light will begin to work. So I can click here anywhere. And then we still have to click twice to define a direction. So I'll click here once and then the second time. And now I have my spotlight placed in this specific location with this specific direction. So you can see that it's not that simple, and for example here I ended up with a strange position for the spotlight and also a very strange direction. So I would like to show you some tips that can help with this placement process. So for example, let's say that we would like to place some spotlights here in this built-in light fixtures. We could try to place them directly here. So I could click here in spot and try to find a center point here, and I could click once and I can even try to lock to the blue axis, for example. But you can see that it's very hard to find the right direction because it tends to search for different references. So it's not working quite well. And the way out here would be to create this spotlight somewhere else. And my suggestion is to try to find a corner or even a wall. So I'll try once again. I'll click here in spot. I'll try to use this corner as a reference. So I can click here to set the reference. Then I can choose where the light will actually start, for example here. And then I can follow along this line and click in 2 more points to set the direction. So you can see here that now the light was placed following this direction, and I can basically use the move tool, and now I can position in the right place. And I can, for example, try to find here the center, and I have to be careful not to put this light above any object, otherwise it won't work. So we can see here that the light is actually working fine, and we can solve a lot of problems if we basically create our lights in different places where we have more specific references. Okay, so I will delete this light and I will show you a similar method that we can use that can also help us to deal with this problem. So instead of creating the light in another position, we can actually draw a reference line. So I can click here in my line tool. I can try to find more or less the center of this object here. So I'll click here and I will draw a line following here the blue axis. Okay, now that we have this reference line, we can create our light. So I can click here in spot. I can click in the first point to be my reference point. Then I can choose where the light will actually be placed, somewhere here along the line, for example here. then I can click in 2 points of this line, for example here and maybe in the end. So we have the direction. So basically, if we draw this reference line, it will become much easier to place our light directly in the location that we desire. And another interesting tip here would be to create the light inside of this fixture as it's a component. So if you take a look at our scene, we have the same object here, and they are components here in SketchUp. So any change that we make in one of them will be also done in the other. So I will delete this light here. I'll click and delete. And instead of creating outside, I will double click this component. So now I'm working directly with this fixture. And now if I create the same spot once again, so I can click here once again in the line, then I can choose where the light will start. Then I can choose 2 points for defining the direction. You will notice that the same light was also created here in this other component, and they are actually instanced. So if we make any change to one of them, it will also apply to the other. Okay, so after we've placed the lights, we can of course change their parameters. So here in the spotlights, we have once more the luminous intensity, which behaves in the same way as the sphere lights. So we can increase this value and the lights will become much powerful. And if we zoom out here, we can see that now the room itself is getting much brighter. So I can exaggerate and we can see the effects. Okay. I'll decrease it a little bit. And here we also have the beam angle, which controls the radius of this light cone. And if we increase this angle, the light now has a wider projection, producing a different light distribution. And if we decrease it, the light becomes more narrow with another kind of light distribution. So depending on the light source itself, you can choose which beam angle is more appropriate. And of course, we can also change the color of the light. So once again, I can click here in the paint bucket. I can choose a color from the materials tab, or I can even grab the last material that I used using here the Alt key and extracting this color from the light. For example, clicking here, and then I can use the same material here on our new lights. So now the scene is much warmer with this orange tone. And one thing that probably you've noticed, and it's actually a bit strange, is that we can see the projection of the light, but we don't see the light itself. So when we look at the fixture here, it appears a bit odd because we don't have the light here. And this is something that we normally correct when we use self-illuminated materials. And this is a subject that we will cover a little bit later. So for now, I'll just leave it as it is. And you can play around with the different intensities here of our scene. And we are starting to have a very interesting image with different light sources. Okay, so I would like to go on and place some more spotlights in our room, and maybe I can place them here in this track lighting fixture. And here it would be important to once again use the line as a reference to place the lights. So I will try to find a good angle. I can hit my ESC key to leave our former components, and now I can orbit my view. I think somewhere here it's quite okay. And once again, I will create a line. So I'll click here in the line tool, and I'll click here somewhere in the center of this light. And when I move my line, I'll try to reference it with this perpendicular snap here. I think here it's quite okay. So now we have an orthographic line considering here the face of this object. So now I can place once again the spotlight, and here it would be interesting to place it once more inside the component so that we can create all the lights at the same time. So first I have to double click to enter the group, then I have to double click once more so we are now inside this specific spot, and then I can click here in my spotlight. I can choose the angle according to my line. I can choose here where my light will begin. So it can be, for example, and this point, and then I just need 2 more points, so maybe here and then this last one here. And now we have the spotlight placed with the right direction according to this object, and you can also notice that all the other lights were already created, and we have a very interesting effect of this light here on our walls. We can of course change the intensity, we can change also the beam angle until we get the effect that we are looking for, and we can also use a specific color. So I can basically choose the material that I want, and I can click here in my light, and now we have this specific tone. And now I can hit the S key to leave our components. And if I take a look at our room, we are starting to have a nice image with different light sources. And of course, we can still change the intensity, but we can also explore the visual settings and change, for example, the exposure and maybe even decrease the highlights. So we start to have a more balanced ambient light here in our exercise. And to finish this video about spotlights, it's very important to talk about photometric lights. So when we use any kind of spotlight, we can load specific files that can simulate a very photorealistic behavior of lights. And this can be a very interesting option when we want to follow a specific lighting project. So I'll close here this window and I will select here any of these spotlights that we've placed. For example, this one here. I will double click to enter the component, then I will select it. And now here in my Enscape objects window, you can see that there is an option here called Load IES Profile. IES is the extension of the photometric map. So I'll click here in this folder to find the files, and you can search for the files that I've provided, and each one of them will produce a different light distribution and a different effect. And together with these files, there is an image that you can check the preview of each map. So you can test them as you wish. And just to test it out, I'll choose here the number 6. Okay, so you can see that it was loaded, but the intensity is too low. So I'll increase it until we start to see the effect. And you can see in a very clear way that this light distribution is exactly like the one that we've just seen in that file preview. And you can also notice that normally when we use this kind of lighting, we get a much more photorealistic result. So just to try a different one, I'll click once again here in the folder, and maybe now I can try the number 11. And you can also check the light distribution in the preview that I've also provided. So click here. And now we have a different light distribution. So the effect is quite different. We can play around with the intensity until we get an interesting result. And if I zoom out my model, you can see that now we have the sphere light producing this street lamp effect and also the ceiling lamp fixture. And now we have the spotlights producing very specific results and this directional lighting effects.